I will never forget the way that young officer looked at me that afternoon. His eyes carried something more than routine authority. They carried a warning that sliced straight through me. As he leaned closer, he pressed a folded paper into my hand and told me, almost under his breath, not to go home with the woman who was driving, not to go home with my own daughter-in-law. He urged me to find somewhere safe. In that instant, everything I thought I knew about my family cracked apart. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared down at that slip of paper, still warm from his touch, afraid of what I might see if I unfolded it. And yet, deep down, a part of me already knew life would never look the same after this moment. You see, my name is Margaret, and I'm 67 years old. I've always lived a quiet, ordinary life in our small Midwestern town. My son, Daniel, has been my pride and joy since the day he was born. He's worked hard, built a life for himself, and after a painful divorce, he finally found someone he believed could bring him happiness again. Her name was Emily, or at least, that's what we all thought. She married my son, moved into our family's rhythms, and for 2 years, I called her my daughter-in-law. As I sat in the passenger seat of her car that day, I thought she was doing me a small kindness, driving me to my doctor's appointment. But the truth was darker, far more dangerous than I could have imagined. That police officer saw something in her identification, something that made his professional composure falter. And in that moment, he shattered the fragile trust I had been holding on to. Shock burned through me. Fear followed quickly after. How could this young woman who smiled so sweetly at neighbors, who held my son's hand in church, be someone I wasn't supposed to trust with my safety? I gripped that folded paper tightly, the weight of my son's future pressing down on me. And I realized I had stepped into a story I never asked to be part of. What I didn't know then was that this warning would unravel years of lies and force me to face truths about Emily and about myself that I was nowhere near ready to face. Looking back now, I can see how the signs were there all along. Small cracks in what seemed like an ordinary life. At the time, though, I brushed them off as quirks. Or worse, as my own imagination. Life in my little house had always been steady and predictable. It was the home Daniel grew up in, the place where my late husband and I poured decades of hard work and love. Every corner carried a memory, his baseball glove still tucked in the garage. The rose bushes I planted the year we celebrated our 25th anniversary. Even the faint marks on the doorframe where I used to measure Daniel's height. Each summer, those walls were more than wood and paint. They held my family's history. When Emily entered our lives, I wanted so badly to believe she was a blessing. After Daniel's divorce, he was fragile, worn down by loneliness. Emily appeared with perfect timing, confident, attentive, and always ready with a smile that seemed to heal his wounded pride. For his sake, I opened my heart to her. I told myself that her presence was a chance for him to rebuild, to start again. But it didn't take long for me to notice how her kindness always seemed to come with strings attached. She rarely offered help unless there was something in it for her. When she did bring up helping me, it often circled back to the idea that maybe I should sell the house, move into something easier. She would phrase it as concern, suggesting that the stairs might be too much for me, or that the upkeep was too heavy a burden. Yet I could feel the undertone. What she really wanted was the money tied up in these walls. Her spending habits also left me uneasy. Daniel worked long hours at the factory, often late into the night, while Emily treated herself to spa days, new clothes, and even hinted about expensive vacations. She had a way of making everything sound reasonable, as if a brand new pickup truck for Daniel was a necessity, or that a kitchen renovation was an investment in their future. Still, I could see the strain in my son's tired eyes and hear it in the heaviness of his voice when he spoke about overtime. I tried to remind myself not to be judgmental, to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, relationships are complicated, and every family has its growing pains. But in the quiet moments, when I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, calculating, almost predatory, I felt a chill that I couldn't explain away. At the time, I told myself it was just me being overprotective of Daniel. I told myself that Emily was simply different from what I was used to, that I needed to adjust. But now, replaying those moments in my mind, I see them clearly for what they were: red flags waving in plain sight. And soon, one ordinary afternoon on the road, all those little doubts would come crashing together in a way I never could have prepared for. The day of the police stop began so simply, so ordinary, that I never would have expected it to split my life into a before and an after. Emily had offered to drive me to my eye doctor's appointment, something she rarely volunteered to do. I remember being grateful, even a little surprised by her sudden helpfulness. Daniel was working another double shift, so I accepted, telling myself maybe she was finally trying to build a better bond with me. We were driving down Highway 42 when I noticed her foot pressing harder on the gas. The speedometer climbed past the limit, and I felt that familiar knot of unease. She always drove a little too fast when she was irritated, and that morning she had seemed restless, distracted. Before I could say anything, the sharp cry of a siren cut through the hum of the tires. Red and blue lights flashed behind us. My stomach dropped. Emily cursed under her breath as she pulled over, plastering a sweet smile on her face as the officer approached. I sat quietly, watching her hand over her license and registration with the confidence of someone who had done this before. The officer looked young, but there was a steadiness in his eyes. He asked her a few routine questions, then glanced toward me in the passenger seat. That was when everything shifted. His expression changed, just slightly, but enough to make my pulse quicken. He asked Emily to step out of the car. I watched them through the windshield as they walked toward his cruiser. She gestured animatedly, her charm turned up to full volume. But the officer's face didn't soften. He spoke into his radio, then returned to my side of the car. When he leaned down, his voice was calm, but carried a weight that froze me. He pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand and said I shouldn't go home with her, that I should find somewhere safe. My heart pounded as I clutched the paper, my mind scrambling to make sense of his words. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. A photograph stared back at me. Emily's face, but with a different name printed beneath it. Rebecca Torres. Wanted in several states. Charges fraud, identity theft, criminal conspiracy. The world seemed to tilt around me. My daughter-in-law, the woman married to my son, was not who she claimed to be. 2 years of shared meals, family gatherings, and everyday moments suddenly felt like a cruel performance staged by a stranger. I wanted to deny it, to insist it was some mistake. Yet the certainty in that officer's eyes told me otherwise. Fear crawled through me. If Emily or Rebecca had lied about something so fundamental, what else had she hidden? What danger was my son truly in? As the officer led her back toward the patrol car in handcuffs, my mind spun with one unbearable thought. Daniel loved her. He trusted her completely. How could I ever tell him the truth without breaking his heart, or worse, losing him to her lies forever? Telling Daniel the truth was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the very place where we'd shared countless meals and moments through the years. It was the table where he used to do his homework, where his father and I had broken both good news and bad. And now It had become the stage for something I never imagined, trying to convince my own son that the woman he loved was a stranger wearing a mask. I told him what the officer had shown me, the paper with her real name and the list of charges. I described the look in the officer's eyes, the weight of his warning. My voice trembled as I spoke, but I held nothing back. But Daniel's face hardened with each word. He shook his head, disbelief etched into every line of his expression. He insisted it was a mistake, that records get mixed up, that people look alike. He clung to the idea that Emily was innocent, that the woman he married couldn't possibly be a criminal. The more I pleaded, the more defensive he became. He reminded me of his father in those moments, the stubborn set of his jaw, the unwillingness to bend once he had made up his mind. It hurt more than I can describe, watching him shield Emily from suspicion. When every instinct in me screamed that she was dangerous, Emily only fueled his denial. She positioned herself as the victim of some cruel mix-up. She spoke of stress and panic attacks, of sleepless nights caused by the trauma of being wrongfully accused. She painted herself as fragile and misunderstood. And Daniel lapped it up because he wanted to believe in her so badly. Soon, it wasn't just disbelief I was battling. It was isolation. She began to pull him further away from me, suggesting that my constant questions were harming her recovery, that my mistrust was toxic for their marriage. Suddenly, Daniel was calling less, visiting rarely. And when he did, the tension in his shoulders told me his loyalty was being tested between his wife and his mother. The walls of my home, once filled with family laughter, echoed with silence. The phone that used to bring his voice on the other end now sat still on the counter, and in the quiet, doubt crept in. Was I truly losing him? Was my son slipping away into a life controlled by a woman who had deceived us all? The heartbreak was crushing. Anger simmered beneath it, not just at Emily, but at the situation, at how powerless I felt. Yet, beneath the despair, a spark of determination flickered. I knew my son. I knew the kind of man I had raised. Someday, he would see the truth. And until that day came, I promised myself I would not stop searching. If no one else could protect him, then I would, even if it meant doing it alone. When Daniel turned away from me, choosing Emily's story over my warning, something inside me shifted. The grief of losing his trust weighed heavy, but beneath that sorrow, a quiet resolve began to grow. If I couldn't reach him with words, then I would arm myself with proof. I wasn't going to sit back and watch my son be destroyed. I started small. At first, it was little things, paying closer attention to the mail that arrived at their house, noticing which envelopes Emily hurried to snatch from the box before Daniel could see. One morning, I caught sight of a letter addressed to someone with the last name Torres. My heart pounded as I replayed that name from the officer's warning. From there, I dug deeper. On the afternoons when Emily went on her so-called shopping trips, I slipped quietly into their house using the old spare key Daniel had given me years ago. My hands trembled as I searched, torn between guilt and necessity. But in the back of her closet, hidden beneath neatly stacked shoeboxes, I found a small lockbox. Inside were driver's licenses, several of them all with her photograph, but different names. My breath caught. Emily, Rebecca, Sarah. She had been so many people. There were also credit cards in those names, and receipts for purchases that didn't match any of Daniel's explanations. About her supposed medical treatments, designer clothes, luxury hotels, expensive dinners in cities hours away. She had been funding a life my son knew nothing about. But the most chilling discovery came in the form of a file tucked into a folder. Marked house. I opened it to find legal documents papers transferring partial ownership of Daniel's home to a company I had never heard of. My stomach sank as I realized what she was doing. She wasn't just bleeding him dry with fake expenses. She was positioning herself to strip him of everything, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And then I saw it, the final blow. Among those papers was a note clipped to an old obituary. My husband's obituary? The section mentioning his life insurance had been highlighted. That was when I understood with painful clarity she wasn't only targeting Daniel, she was targeting me too. In that moment, the fear that had once paralyzed me transformed into something else: determination. This woman had invaded my family, stolen my son's trust, and set her sights on everything I held dear. But she had underestimated me. For years, I had been a teacher, patient and observant. I knew how to read people, how to catch the details others overlooked. And now, all of those skills would be turned toward one purpose: stopping her before it was too late. I tucked the documents back carefully, my heart racing, but my mind sharper than it had been in months. The game had changed. I was no longer just a mother trying to protect her son. I was an investigator gathering evidence, preparing for the confrontation that I knew was coming. The knock on my door came just after dusk. I peered through the small window and saw her standing there, holding a casserole dish in her manicured hands, her face arranged into that perfect mask of concern. Emily Rebecca, whatever her name truly was, looked every bit the caring daughter-in-law, but I knew better now. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but she had already seen the light in my hallway. Hiding wasn't an option. My heart pounded as I opened the door, leaving the chain in place at first. She smiled sweetly, insisting she just wanted to talk, that Daniel was worried about the tension between us. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and stepped aside. She glided past me, placing the casserole neatly on my counter, moving around my kitchen as if it belonged to her. She sat down at my table, folding her hands with practiced grace. Her words were soft, almost sympathetic, as she spoke about misunderstandings, about how the police had made a mistake. She claimed the accusations were nothing but confusion, that I was allowing suspicion to tear apart the family. But when I pressed, when I mentioned the other names, the hidden documents, and the letters I had seen, the mask slipped. Her eyes hardened. Her smile twisted into something cold and sharp. She leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate, telling me I was too smart for my own good, that most women in my position would have ignored the signs, desperate to believe their sons had found happiness. But not me. I had become a problem she needed to solve. The chill that ran through me deepened when she laid out her plan without hesitation. She told me she could arrange for Daniel to have an accident at work, something that would look tragic but ordinary. An equipment malfunction, a fall, an electrical shock. She said it so casually, as if she were discussing weekend plans. My son's life had become a bargaining chip in her scheme. But even as fear coiled in my stomach, I stayed steady, because what she didn't know was that I had prepared for this moment. I told her calmly that she had underestimated me. That casserole she had so proudly placed in my fridge, I had already switched it out earlier in the day. While she thought she was delivering a gesture of peace, she had actually carried her own undoing into my kitchen. She blinked, her bravado faltering for the first time. I explained that I had laced it with a sedative my doctor prescribed me for anxiety strong enough to disorient, to slow her down. Already, I could see the slight wobble in her movements, the sheen of sweat on her forehead. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice slurred just enough to betray her. I pulled out my phone then, showing her the recording I had been making since she walked through my door. Every threat, every chilling admission captured and already uploaded to a secure folder, had shared with the police. Her confidence crumbled. She tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her, buckling under the weight of the drug coursing through her system. She cursed me then, her true self fully exposed, spitting venom about how people like me were weak, easy targets. But I only felt a strange calm. For the first time in months, I was the one holding the power. The sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, flashing lights soon cutting through my kitchen window. Her head jerked toward the door, panic flashing across her face as the realization sank in. This time, there would be no escape, no reinvention under another name. I stood tall as the knock echoed on my door again, steady this time, not from a predator, but from the men and women who had come to take her away. Relief surged through me, mixing with the lingering fear. And I knew the worst was finally over. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs is one I will never forget. For all her charm, all her practiced smiles, all the lives she had woven together with lies, she finally faced consequences she couldn't escape. The courtroom was quiet the day the sentence was read, 15 years in federal prison. It wasn't enough to erase the pain she had caused, but it was enough to close that chapter and keep her from harming others. At least for a time. Daniel sat beside me during the trial. At first, he struggled, still clinging to the image of the woman he thought he knew. But as the evidence unfolded, the forged identities, the financial theft, the recorded threats, I watched the denial drain from his face. What replaced it was heartbreak. He looked at me then with tears in his eyes, whispering his apology, telling me how sorry he was for doubting me. I squeezed his hand, and in that moment, the rift between us began to heal. I reminded him that none of this was his fault. He had been manipulated by someone who made deception into an art form. What mattered now was that he had survived it, that he was free from her hold, and that together we could begin again. Sitting there in that courtroom, I realized something important about myself too. For so long, I had seen myself only as a widow, a mother, someone nearing the quieter years of life. But in the face of betrayal, I had discovered a strength I didn't know I still carried. I wasn't just a victim of her lies, I was the one who exposed them. I had protected my son, and in doing so, I proved to myself that resilience doesn't fade with age. Life has returned to something more peaceful now. My home, once shadowed by suspicion, feels like mine again. Daniel visits often, and though we are both still healing, our bond is stronger for what we endured. I look around my kitchen, the same table, the same walls, but it feels different now. It feels like a place where truth prevailed. If there's one lesson I want to share from this experience, it's this: trust your instincts, even when others dismiss your doubts, even when speaking up makes you feel alone. That quiet voice inside may be the one thing that saves you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced betrayal, or had to find strength when you least expected it, know that you are not alone. I would love to hear your experiences. Share them in the comments, because your voice matters. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes, the hardest chapters of our lives carry the most important lessons.